Come, thrill at the deranged and death-defying exploits of Mango, king of the pickles.
Marvel at the eccentric, who had enough and declared himself Emperor of the United States.
Discover a strange commune of oddballs, artists, and misfits who are waiting to meet you.
All this plus more phantasmagoria from history, science, and the paranormal.
It will excite.
It will inspire.
It will begin with your first sip of Odd Tonic.
Welcome to the parlor.
We have saved a special place for you on the settee, so come, make yourself cozy in this, our inaugural episode of Odd Tonic.
I'm just so excited for the wonderful, weird stories we have planned to share.
Me too. This has been a long time coming.
It sure has.
But it occurs to me that this is our guest's first visit.
Brief introductions?
I think that's in order.
May I introduce you first?
I insist.
What can I say about this enticing gentleman before me that isn't obvious?
Well, maybe a lot, because they can't see me.
I can see you. Maxwell and I have worked together for numerous years.
Yes.
Before that, he has endeavored with some pretty astonishing projects, perhaps best known as the creative director of a series of award-winning mystery games starring America's favorite Titian-haired sleuth. And if you don't know what that means, you have some sleuthing to do.
Thank you, love. And seated beside me is my partner of staggering talent, the radiant Ms. Jennifer Page. You may already be familiar with her work as an artist, a celebrated cult film actress, mermaid.
True.
And after a third glass of wine, an adorable, if unsolicited palm reader.
Oh my gosh, that is so true.
We wouldn't have you any other way.
Thank you.
Along with much merriment, our union has brought together our extensive collection of, look at all the books. Mm-hmm. Jennifer, look at all the books.
It's a fire hazard.
It's a mega collection of metaphysics, history, whimsy, and the inescapably odd.
It's all nested here in our Victorian Gothic parlor, where you'll find us nested most of the time.
So true. And through Odd Tonic, we are opening the parlor doors to you, dear guests, to share with you our very favorite morsels from our library of curiosities.
Ready? Is this going down?
I think we're finally done.
Oh my goodness, let's do it.
Okay.
If you're one of those fine people interacting with our social media posts, we've noticed an interesting trend. Topics embracing your odd, celebrating your strange, and finding those like-minded weirdos really resonates with you.
Oh, it makes our hearts sing.
It makes us swoon because that is the very heart of Odd Tonic. So we dedicate this first episode to you, and we'll examine two of Britain's most unusual aristocrats of yore, one brilliant but mad, and the other just brilliantly mad.
We'll also investigate one of our very favorite eccentrics, the strange but true case of Joshua Norton. Now, aficionados of strange history may already be familiar with the tale of America's self-appointed emperor, but stick around. There's method in our madness.
Maxwell and I have a deep affinity for eccentrics, and we love stories of their lives and inevitable hijinks.
It's so true. Jennifer, did you know that the UK is home to the greatest number of documented eccentrics? And many of them have been collected in a wonderful volume called Great British Eccentrics by S.D. Tucker. In its pages, you'll discover two of our favorites, starting with Henry Cavendish, who lived from 1731 to 1810.
Cavendish was the perfect illustration of that now all but extinct species of humanity, the gentleman scientist.
Ooh, I loved them.
Back when the pursuit of scientific knowledge was often much more of a private affair left to those who had time and the money to do so.
Yeah, aristocrats, mainly.
Yes. The son of an eminent meteorologist and mathematician, he came into a massive inheritance at the age of 40, transforming him overnight into one of the richest men in England.
And by the way, I'm still waiting for my massive inheritance.
Yeah, I'd be willing to spend that for you.
Yeah? What would you spend your massive inheritance on?
Oh, I think we know. I'd probably buy a winery. and
a lock to keep everyone else out. And what did Cavendish do with his money?
Cavendish bought 2 London townhouses. One of them he turned into a massive library full of scientific books and journals, which grew so extensive, he ended up hiring a German scholar to run it for him full time, devising an elaborate series of receipts and chits that he took to filling in himself whenever he wished to borrow his own book. Do you think he fined himself too if he was late? He put it in the mail and received it and
gave himself a good scolding.
Yes. His other property, meanwhile, the one in which he actually lived, became effectively a kind of personal laboratory with his own private observatory, forge, and weather observation station, filled with hundreds of scientific instruments, many of which had been made specifically for Henry by his own salaried instrument maker.
So jealous.
I know. Could you imagine?
I want to see this place.
I want to live there. Maybe he'll adopt us. Though now a rich man, he maintained his habits of extreme frugality, continued to wear his same old clothes, and by that we mean really old. He wore a 3-cornered hat and a faded purple frock coat day in, day out. Items so old, they could have easily served as props for a costume drama.
That's like the parachute pants of today.
I think anything is classier than that, no matter how old. I'm sure they were like moths are flying out of his lapel, and it's interactive.
Part of the presentation of my ensemble.
Lord Cavendish devoted himself entirely to his research, and my friends, he was no slouch. In 1766, he discovered hydrogen.
Hydrogen, ladies and gentlemen. Hydrogen, he discovered.
I'm so behind in my own endeavors. And in 1781 was the first to demonstrate that water was composed of 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen.
He was a busy man.
He was. Conversely, he also tried to devise a scale for measuring electrical currents by giving himself shocks and then attempting to estimate the magnitude of pain caused by each effort.
Oh, to be the fly on the wall.
I just want to see the journal. Like, I'll give that a 8. And then, that's a B7.
That is a total Muppet Labs sort of experiment right there.
Well, at least he did it to himself, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like, hey, come over for dinner. I've got this fun game. Henry was less eager to receive credit for everything he found out, sometimes not bothering to tell anyone about his discoveries at all. It was not until decades after his death, when his papers were being sorted through, and thank goodness they were, that it was realized that many recent discoveries attributed to various other scientists had actually been anticipated by Cavendish nearly a century beforehand.
Can you believe that? Science for science sake.
I love it. He just wanted to know.
Yeah.
As this suggests, the noble scientist was not overly keen to court attention. He was notoriously shy and retiring. In fact, he was so shy of his servants, particularly the female ones, that he preferred to communicate with them by letter, developing a complicated series of double doors and internal mailboxes so he wouldn't have to set eyes on them. It's said that Cavendish even installed an entire separate staircase after the accidental and startling encounter of passing a housekeeper. Oh my, someone else is here. Did you hear me screaming from shocking myself? As a young man, his father had dragged Henry along to dinners at the Royal Society, London's premier scientific association, and never one to break a routine, he continued to attend such occasions throughout his entire life, though he was hardly the model of sociability.
No, why? Why did he do this to himself?
If someone said something to him that he found uninteresting, he'd simply refuse to reply and sat there in stony silence, or sometimes he emitted a weird squeak and then ran into a corner, talking to himself about more appealing matters instead.
stony silence, but if you could only hear what was going on in his head, just the screaming and the noise.
Silent death scream.
And the noise.
Whenever he did speak, it was in a bizarre, high-pitched tone like he had swallowed helium. Wait, are we sure he didn't discover helium? No,
and was balloon animals one of the things that was later discovered a century later that privately...
Like Da Vinci type diagrams of a poodle. Whenever it was time for him to enter a dining room, it took him some time to pluck up the courage, loitering around outside nervously with a strange gait, steeling himself to face his fellow men. I think he's my spirit animal because I can completely relate. I'm not a public speaker,
I can do this.
You have to talk me down or up or something.
And you have a very strange gait as well, kind of like John Cleese.
I thought we agreed we weren't going to talk about that. In particular, he feared strangers. When one day an Austrian visitor approached Cavendish, praised him on his genius, and informed him that he had traveled all the way from his homeland to meet him, Henry panicked and ran straight for the building without a word. You just see
poor guy.
High knees, just
poor guy.
While still holding a teacup and saucer, high knees across the field. Another time when a bank employee called at his house unexpectedly, wanting to know what Henry wanted him to do with some 80,000 pounds of interest he had accumulated.
Nice.
Cavendish was so alarmed that he threatened to close all his accounts down on the spot if the man didn't leave his presence immediately.
I think he would have been glad to give him the 80,000 pounds just to leave him alone.
Just take it.
Henry Cavendish, we love him. Now, our second favorite is a real corker. His name was John Mad Jack Mitten, who lived in 1796 to 1834. The squire of Halston Hall in Shropshire, Mitten used his $13,000 annual income from his lands, which was over $900,000 today, to lead a life of what he considered to be leisure, but few others might agree. A boisterous child, Jack was expelled from Westminster School for fighting one of his teachers, and chased off many of his subsequent home tutors by playing bizarre practical jokes on them, such as placing live horses inside their bedrooms.
Were the bedrooms on the first floor? Could you imagine?
Using an elaborate pulley system.
It's a good joke. It's worth it.
Pressured by relatives, Mitten eventually agreed to go to Cambridge, carting with him an astonishing 2,000 bottles of port to get him through the boring lectures.
I see no problem with this.
None whatsoever. In 1819, he secured immediate election to Parliament as the Tory candidate for Shrewsbury. And how did he do this, dear Jennifer? By wandering around the town offering voters 10-pound notes, a ploy which cost him the modern-day equivalent of $977,500. But listen to this. Attending the Commons for the very first time, the half-deaf Mitten spent only half an hour there, decided the speeches were too boring and inaudible to be bothered with, packed his bags, and went home, never to return.
Do you think he bothered to tell anyone?
No, I'm sure he didn't.
I said good day.
What an amazing investment. Back at Halston, Mad Jack truly began to earn his nickname, devoting his life to hunting and field sports, amassing 2,000 dogs, some of which he fed on steak and champagne, and allowing his favorite horse, Baronet, to live inside the house with him. Another horse, however, he accidentally killed by getting it drunk on port.
Oh, my goodness.
Maybe that's your spirit animal.
The drunk horse. It'll be on my family crest.
Such was his devotion to sportsmanship that he amassed a hunting wardrobe of 700 pairs of boots.
I'm feeling called out.
1,000 hats and 3,000 shirts. A pointless extravagance seen as, during an especially exciting fox chase, he would often strip and ride around fully nude or in his underwear, even during snow and wintry weather.
Wow.
One time he was observed running across a frozen pond, naked, in pursuit of a duck.
And that duck was traumatized for the rest of its life.
Such was his enthusiasm for sports involving animals that he felt moved to invent a few of his own, such as punching bulldogs, biting mastiffs, and attempting to lift them into the air with his bare teeth, wrestling with bears, and equipping his stable boys with ice skates and leading them off into wild, slippery rat hunts. One time, sick of merely jumping over hedges on horseback, he attempted to see if one of his steeds could leap over a toll gate while pulling him in his carriage behind it, with predictable results.
Hold my port. I'm doing this thing.
The constantly inebriated Minton actively enjoyed being involved in painful accidents, especially when they broke his ribs. Once, appalled by a passenger's admission that he had never been involved in a road crash, Minton deliberately drove his carriage up a steep bank at a top speed and tipped it over to show the timid fool what he was missing out on.
He would get such bad Uber reviews. No tip.
Squire Minton's most notorious, now these are the notorious ones. His most notorious two exploits involved acts of insane, self-induced peril. Firstly, there was the time he dressed up in full hunting gear, jumped onto the back of his pet brown bear, Nell, and rode it into the dining room to surprise some guests. They certainly were surprised, particularly when Nell threw her master off and began biting vigorously into his leg. Secondly, there was the infamous occasion when, bothered by hiccups one evening, Minton decided to scare them away by deliberately setting himself on fire. After two witnesses to this act of utter lunacy helped him beat out the resulting inferno, because he's full of port, it's probably, it's
sweating.
It's like a methane leak through his mouth. And they put him to bed, his body covered in horrible burns. Mad Jack expressed deep satisfaction at the success of his plan. "The hiccups are gone, by God," he said, and he went straight to sleep. So careless was he of his money that visitors would frequently find banknotes lying around his grounds in random places, having been dropped by Minton and just left there. After his second wife just had enough and fled Halston Hall in 1830.
Why did she flee?
I don't know. No warning. Minton appears to have become lonely. Walking across London's Westminster Bridge one day, however, he perceived a solution to this problem. Noticing an attractive young woman whom he had never met before, he simply walked up to her and, out of nowhere, offered her the sum of $650 annually if she would be his concubine.
Challenge accepted.
She agreed, and they stayed together until the squire's ultimate death in 1834, following a stretch in debtor's prison. Minton was only 38, but seeing as he had taken to drinking 8 pints of port and brandy per day, Jennifer, and living off of a diet almost exclusively of filbert nuts, perhaps it was not surprising that Mango, King of the Pickles, as his neighbors mysteriously dubbed him, was not long for this world. And again, you can find these and many more amazing stories of extraordinary individuals in S.D. Tucker's book, Great British Eccentrics. We highly recommend it.
As a continued love letter to our people, we're ready to tell the tale of another eccentric and one of Odd Tonic's patron saints. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, we present to you His Imperial Majesty Emperor Norton I. Here's the story as it's most often told.
In San Francisco, 1852, there was a businessman named Joshua Norton. Norton had immigrated from Cape Town, South Africa, only 3 years before, and had already become a very prosperous businessman, dealing in real estate speculation and imports. He became part of San Francisco's elite. He was a member of all the right clubs and committees, and he was invited to all the right openings and galas. Now, during this time, China was in the grip of a terrible famine, forcing it to ban all rice exports. Soon, the price of rice in San Francisco skyrocketed from 4 cents per pound to 36 cents. Norton received word one day, however, that a Peruvian ship loaded with 200,000 pounds of rice was just off port and waiting to discharge. So, accepting an offer to corner the market, he purchased the entire cargo for $25,000. So, if you did the math, about 12.5 cents per pound.
Which would be great if he could sell it for 36 cents per pound.
Absolutely. So, after the contract was signed, the rice-laden Peruvian ship pulled into the harbor, followed by another rice-laden Peruvian ship, followed by another, and within days, Peruvian rice glutted the market and the price plummeted to 3 cents per pound. Norton was ruined.
Poor Norton. I just imagine at that point just people walking around with rice spilling out of their pockets. They're paving the streets with rice. They're throwing it at weddings. This is what started the tradition of throwing rice at weddings because there was so much of it. It became the new confetti.
I hear someday it might be the San Francisco treat. Nobody heard much from him for about 7 years when, in 1859, a letter he submitted to the San Francisco Evening Bulletin was published. It read, "At the peremptory request and desire of a large majority of the citizens of these United States, I, Joshua Norton, formerly of Algoa Bay, Cape of Good Hope, and now for these last 9 years and 10 months past of San Francisco, California, declare and proclaim myself Emperor of these United States."
It was a sensation. A once prosperous businessman had lost it all and gone completely cracked. And now he resides with delusions of grandeur among the many bummers and gutter snipes of Portsmouth Square. The next month, Norton posted another edict in which America's new emperor abolished Congress. 2 weeks later, he dissolved the California Supreme Court. In his fourth proclamation, he informed Congress that they were in violation of not disbanding. He called upon the commander of the U.S. Army to clear the halls of Congress with suitable force. The proclamation signed Norton I, Emperor of the United States. And after Napoleon III's invasion of Mexico in 1862, Norton extended his official title to read, and Protector of Mexico.
So, how did the royal subjects of San Francisco react to their new monarch? Certainly, it hadn't gone so well for Norton's fellow royalty. Around the same time, a man in Stockton and another in New York had both publicly proclaimed their absolute power, only to be packed up and sent to asylums.
Here you go, get in the paddy wagon, here you go.
But San Francisco's legendary acceptance of those who lived more comfortably on the fringe was in full swing, even in the mid-1800s. Let's imagine that you're a tourist stepping onto its streets in 1869, fresh off the newly completed Transcontinental Railroad. You would be greeted by a curious sight. Around the cities, saloons and businesses of all kinds, bakeries, flower carts, men's clothing, all have signs proclaiming, "By appointment to His Majesty, Emperor Norton I." And then you'd hear it.
Good morning, Emperor.
"Hello, Your Majesty."
Your Grace.
"Hiya, Emp." You turn to watch people on the sidewalk, bowing and curtsying to an odd-looking, bearded gentleman. He wears a shabby blue uniform of the Union Army, large gold epaulets sewn on his shoulders. He wears a fine, tall beaver hat, punctuated with ostrich feathers, and sports a rusty saber at his side, a relic of the Mexican War. In broken-down boots, he strides with quiet dignity and weighty purpose, leading the way with his favorite walking stick with a bronze snake handle, a gift from a loyal subject. You hail a bemused-looking shopkeep standing outside his door.
Say there, who's that fellow with the stylish cane?
Why, that is none other than Emperor Norton, a local bummer who believes himself to be the Imperial Majesty of the United States.
And you let him believe it?
We do more than that. Emperor Norton has full run of the city. He rides all the trains, cable cars, and riverboats for free. He eats in the best restaurants and stays at the finest hotels and never has to pay a cent. And no theater would even consider an opening night without reserving the best seat in the house for him. You stare after the scruffy, ostrich-plumed figure in disbelief.
You don't say.
The shopkeep leans in confidentially. Well, not everybody was on board at first. 3 years ago, a police officer locked up the imp on charges of lunacy. But there was a huge public outcry, and the chief of police let him out with the humblest of apologies. That's why, since then, every police officer in the city acknowledges Emperor Norton with a salute.
Land's sakes!
Some say he's secretly the son of Emperor Napoleon III and in hiding to prevent persecution.
Wow.
Others say he's actually supremely wealthy and feigning poverty because he's a miser. Either way, we love him just the same. Dumbfounded by this tale, you find yourself easily led through the shop doorway to be surrounded by San Francisco's souvenirs, including a plethora of Emperor Norton items, such as picture postcards, cigars, dolls, plaster statuettes, jugs, mugs, and cartoon caricatures. Just wait till the folks back home hear about this.
Okay, I have my top 5 Emperor Norton products ready to go.
Oh, no. What did you do?
All right, we have the Emperor Norton What Emp t-shirt, Emperor Norton Women's Weakness Pills, the Emperor Norton adult diaper for when you've lost it all.
No!
And the most insulting product, the Emperor Norton rice.
Oh!
Yep.
That was 4.
Yeah, but who does a top 4 list? I couldn't think of 5. Sorry. Fast forward in time and another story is added to the Emperor Norton legend. On November 12, 1936, the San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge is opened, 64 years after Emperor Norton himself outlined his original vision and edict for the bay-spanning suspension bridge linking Oakland and San Francisco via the Yerba Buena Island.
So, maybe he wasn't so crazy.
Is how the Joshua Norton story usually ends. Now, dear guest, let me tell you what is crazy. 160 years after Emperor Norton came on the scene, this is the story that is still being told about him. This tidied, simplified, and partially fictionalized yarn designed to sell trinkets to tourists, of which the real and impoverished Joshua Norton never saw a penny.
A story that sells Norton out for easy laughs, while continuing to obfuscate reality. When we return, we're going to reveal to you, dear guest, the astonishing truth about Joshua Norton. We hope you're enjoying the Odd Tonic podcast. If you are, please hit the subscribe button and write us a kind review on iTunes. It really will help us out.
And tell your friends about us, especially the weird ones. We like the weird ones.
We like the weird ones. And they can follow us on Twitter and Instagram and like us on Facebook, all at Odd Tonic Society.
Also, next week's show will feature weird tales from Odd Tonic guests like you. Nearly everyone has had an experience that defies explanation, and we want to hear yours.
Yes.
Tell us about that time when the strange, curious, or spooky got up close and personal. It could be shared on an upcoming episode. Anonymously, of course, if you prefer.
Send it to the parlor at oddtonicsociety.com, and either spelling of parlor is fine. Or if you are an aficionado of handwritten letters, as we are, post haste to Odd Tonic, P.O. Box 14751, Mill Creek, Washington 98082. We can't wait to read about your brush with the bizarre.
Now back to our story. They say the nail that sticks out the most gets hammered hardest. And those of us who've lived a life as those nails know what it's like to be taken at face value, misunderstood, or dismissed. In the next part of the show, we're going to take a deep dive to better understand, commiserate with, and celebrate a fellow nail who, for too long, has been taken at face value. Here's Maxwell to continue the amazing, real tale of Emperor Norton.
How exactly did a mild-mannered businessman transform himself into a self-appointed emperor? Much speculation and focus has been placed on this over the years, and we have a hypothesis. In fact, I believe, dear Jennifer, an Odd Tonic exclusive. To follow, pop on your sleuthing hat, not unlike a Titian-haired sleuth, and let's look at the stranger-than-fiction events that led to the rise of a monarch.
If he doesn't turn out to be Batman, I may be disappointed.
We're going to go back, way back to the emperor's pre-emperor days in 1851, when Norton's businesses were still going strong. San Francisco was the embodiment of the Wild West, and lawlessness was rampant. The city had experienced 6 major fires within the last 18 months, and the most recent had burned most of the city to the ground.
Is there any major U.S. city that doesn't have a major fire in its history? Asking for Chicago.
And Seattle. All of the fires pointed to arson. And fed up with the very shady local police force, a band of businessmen and thugs committed the even shadier act of forming a vigilante committee. As you'd expect, the committee was little more than an angry mob with meeting notes. And the only voice of reason to be recorded in those was that of Joshua Norton. His was the sole voice to move that the committee grant those it captured the opportunity to actually defend themselves before they could be hung. Now, judging by the group's subsequent actions, its kangaroo court left little room for justice.
See? He could have easily been a just vigilante crime fighter.
He's not Batman. This set the stage for the upside-down world in which Joshua Norton now found himself living. He witnessed men gaining instant fortunes from mining gold and silver, and others would simply just go to a place of valuable land, occupy it, and successfully call it theirs. He lost an investment when Alderman Harry Migg skipped town, and it was discovered that Honest Harry had actually raised enormous capital simply by inventing his own municipal bonds. And Norton was there when the California Board of Land Commissioners, get this, had temporarily turned over most of the city, the adjacent islands, and a subsequent piece of Marin County to a complete charlatan because he invented land grants bearing the forged signature of a Mexican governor. Surely there was room in this boiling pot of chaos, avarice, and corruption for a just man like Norton to make a return.
Exactly.
Well, we already know the answer to that. But contrary to the popular story, Norton didn't disappear after the rice fiasco. He worked really hard to salvage his situation, unaware that a series of cascading failures awaited him. He brought a lawsuit against the Peruvian rice exporters, insisting that the rice ship's cargo was inferior to the samples that he had been shown. After numerous appeals and counter-appeals, he ultimately lost the suit, his $25,000, plus huge legal costs.
I find it hard to imagine that Peruvian ship didn't realize that there was another Peruvian ship and then another and another right behind them when they got that price.
Yeah, exactly. I think the same thing.
Which is harder to prove, but...
Right. You're not going to prove that in court. And it's possible that Norton was actually stalling for time because California was the Wild West and fortunes were being made in the craziest of ways every week. So he could have been saved. Who knows, right? Norton regrouped and became a stockbroker and realtor. And immediately got wiped out again when the Panic of 1855 created a disastrous buyer's market. Norton lost all but 2 of his remaining assets.
You know, when you call something the Panic of 1855, it's not going to end well. They should have known better.
That's really
what do we name it?
Irresponsible of them. And then there was the issue with Norman Bugbee. Norman Bugbee, an architect who had entrusted Norton with power of attorney over his financial affairs while he traveled for 3 years, came home and demanded an accounting.
Here, sir, take care of all my affairs, whilst I playboy around the world. It all be best in good order upon my return.
I'm sure he sounded just like that.
Thank you.
Norton stalled, perhaps hoping to realize a profit from a pending transaction. We're really not sure.
Yeah.
But he couldn't account for all of Bugbee's money. So Bugbee sued, and the papers called Norton an embezzler.
That's like a bad Yelp review. There's no recovery.
That's going to leave a ding on his LinkedIn profile.
Exactly.
Norton sought to repay Bugbee and secure a bank loan by offering his last 2 assets, valuable water lots. The bank took the lots, but only gave Norton enough money to satisfy Bugbee.
Why, though? This detail really bothers me. Why didn't he get the full amount? It's just magically the amount that was owed? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and Norton was forced to file for bankruptcy. For 3 more years, he made his living as a commodities merchant, placing ads for coffee and cocoa and other cargoes in the newspaper. But these ads appeared less and less until they disappeared altogether. Joshua Norton, what we're trying to say here, went down swinging. He played the game to the very end, and despite his best efforts, he still lost everything. So, remember this, dear guest, during your darkest hours. Fine people like you and us have been receiving undeserved shellackings since time began. What matters is how you bounce back. And Norton's return was a spectacular.
I've got it.
What?
Emperor Norton brand shellac. That's the 5th product.
Well done.
Sorry.
Now, what happened to his mind at this point is still up for conjecture. The esteemed Norton biographer William Drury postulates that schizophrenia, which may have been always percolating quietly under the surface, was now fully revealed. Others suggest that the emperor was his histrionic personality birthed by Norton's deep depression.
I think everyone is guilty of that then at this point.
Yeah, becoming Batman when you're really depressed.
Yeah. Got my costume ready.
Well, one thing is for sure. From this point on, Norton let it be known with utter conviction that he was the Bourbon crown prince to the throne of France. Norton claimed, quote, "To avoid assassination, I had been sent to Cape Town, where I was adopted by John Norton. I've retained his name for the love I had for him, and have taken the title of emperor, for which I am rightly entitled to bear."
By the way, thorough research was done, and no, his claims are not factually correct. But here's our official odd tonic hypothesis regarding Norton's transformation. See if you agree.
Yeah, what do you think of this? Before emigrating to the U.S., Norton had worked for his merchant father, who was devoutly religious. His speaking up on behalf of the vigilante captives certainly suggests that Joshua Norton arrived in California with his father's strong moral fiber and straight-as-an-arrow ethics. And Wild West San Francisco, it likely felt antithetical to Norton's character. Is it possible that he may have been seduced and worn down by the city's anything-goes, get-rich-quick environment? To us, his lawsuit against the rice importers feels a little dubious. And, of course, there was no defense for Norton once he was exposed using another's money to bankroll his own personal investments. If he did unwarily let himself become corrupted, just imagine his mindset when he finally hit rock bottom. He had to face that he had dirtied his hands with the worst of them, gone completely against his own principles, and what had he received in return? Public humiliation, guilt, shame, utter ruin as a reward. And that, dear listener, is going to change a person. It's either going to break you or it's going to put you on a path for rebirth, or perhaps equal shares of both.
Right.
For a time, Norton retreated from the outside world. We know this for a fact. And likely deeply into himself. What did he find there? Well, we suspect that he may have found a kind of spiritual awakening in which he powerfully rediscovered and reclaimed his noble aspects. But something else was waiting down there, nestled in the roots. William Drury suggested that Norton may have toyed with the fantasy or outright belief of his being a secret royal when he was young. Later, when he was part of San Francisco's elite, Drury found that Norton had even been heard to say that the, quote, sorry state of the country would be different if he were emperor. The certainty of being a secret royal may have been an indelible part of him for decades, a strong and persistent part that chafed from being hidden, having no place, no function. But now, seeking to reclaim the foundations of his highest and truest self, Norton bit down on the stopper and uncorked the genie from the bottle. He finally donned the emperor's uniform because life had gone out of its way to clear all artifices for him, because the reborn Norton was ready to emerge, shining with his inexorable, inexplicable truth. And with it, he would try to rectify the corrupt city that had led him to ashes. Because his beloved adopted country was free-falling towards civil war, and as nobody yet had taken a firm stand to prevent it, he would. Because to do anything else would have been crazy.
I think there's a real important point here that Norton could have disappeared in defeat, but instead he became more of himself.
Yeah.
Never, ever let the reactions of others or the event that life throws at you dictate your narrative. You are you.
Yeah.
Not what happens or doesn't happen to you. The truth of who we are is on the inside, not external influences that come and go on a whim. I mean, you can't even, it's all on the inside.
Well put, darling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Something I'm a little passionate about, if you can imagine.
I couldn't tell. No, again, thank you. That was lovely. When looking at Emperor Norton's prolific newspaper proclamations in context, you know, they were really no less unhinged as your average op-ed. He was a true patriot and an adversary of corruption and fraud of all kinds. When he identified politicians shirking their duty for personal gain, he, like others, called them out in the press. The only difference was Norton's naive but pure insistence that if elected leaders were not going to properly do their jobs, then they just needed to get out of the way and let him do it. Not out of ego, but for the greater good. But the proclamations did not carry Norton's intended effect, and instead, they created a new kind of trouble for him. Because these missives were signed by a man who really believed that he had power of absolute authority, their content was ignored with more ferocity than usual by those for whom it was intended. But San Francisco's press was paying attention. Norton's proclamations would make a paper sell like hotcakes, and any mention of the emperor was a surefire hit with readers. So the press featured Emperor Norton regularly, and always as an object of limitless humor and ridicule. Reporters wrote many comic, over-the-top proclamations of their own and attributed them to Norton the First. He was the go-to punchline for various lazy jokes, and any action of the emperor was reported on with stinging embellishments, ensuring his place as the city's pathetic punching bag. Businesses took their cue from the press. Some saloons and shops would welcome the emperor in, since the mere sight of the emp often inspired some reporter on a slow news day to spin some rudely comic yarn about him. The result was usually a puff piece that tied the name of the establishment with Norton, and it would boost the shop's business with the working class, who was fascinated with Norton. So it's little wonder that theaters would reserve their finest seat for Emperor Norton each opening night, or create comic operas based on him, which they did, because Norton was quickly becoming a cash cow. Additionally, when a saloon or shopkeeper did him some small kindness, the emperor took note and granted the owner to install a sign announcing their business as being by appointment to His Majesty Emperor Norton. Now, the signs were looked upon as a droll joke at first, but the laughter stopped when, again, the business saw a sharp uptick in sales. The signs quickly became a coveted status, one that many took without earning.
I'd like to take a minute to call out a few questionable businesses that may have used the Emperor Norton moniker, perhaps without permission. Diphtheria Jane's Fence Painting Service. The business slogan was, "I paint fences with this stick." One-Eyed Phillips Mobile Sock Darning. Horseface Jack's personal spittoon in the back alley behind the Stumbling Fish Saloon. It's not even a business. Pappy Dan's Public Outhouse at the end of Old Dunbar Street. And last but not least, Hiccuping Pete's dilapidated front porch where he sat all day throwing old turnips, used shoe leather strips soaked in turpentine, and crumpled up crude drawings of President Grant at innocent passerbyers as they went about their daily duties. Right?
Thank you. Thank you for those.
You're welcome.
All right. I think I'm back. Also contrary to the story told to the tourists, these Emperor Norton-driven sales did not earn His Majesty free meals and lodging. For the first 10 years of the Emperor's reign, he was left to his own devices like any of the city's bummers, as they called them. Photos of him during this era reveal him as being painfully thin. His single meal per day was from the free lunch counter, the bygone institution of a saloon providing a modest meal with the price of a 25 or 50-cent cocktail. Sometimes someone might offer to buy the emperor a drink to procure his lunch, but mostly Emperor Norton would cover the cost the way he'd earn his 50 cents a day for his shabby hotel room, by taxing those subjects who he knew could easily afford it. The truth was, San Francisco's relationship with His Majesty was complex and much more opportunistic than symbiotic. This was to change a little only at the start of Norton's second decade as emperor. This was when the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, bringing with it waves of tourists who had heard about the emperor, his celebrity now having reached the East. Norton met this opportunity industriously. Printing his own script in 50-cent, $5, and $10 denominations, tourists could acquire the best Emperor Norton souvenir of all, a signed and dated autograph from His Majesty himself. With the script, Norton now had a valuable commodity, which afforded his lodging and meals with more ease.
So I don't think I ever told you this. Knowing your affinity for Emperor Norton, I looked into purchasing one of his original notes. Banknotes. Yeah, I did. So I joined an auction house online, and because that's what you needed to do in order to see the pricing and stuff like that. You know, not bid, just see the pricing. Yeah. $20,000 for one of his original scripts.
No.
Yeah, so I love you dearly, but I don't have. So that was a big no. I just couldn't.
Apology accepted.
Right.
Tell me it was one of the 50-cent scripts that were going for $25,000.
It was a small denomination. And the funny side story to that is because I had to sign up and register with the site, I got email after email about like 15 different types of auctions that were going on at any given time. And I had to unsubscribe to each one. It was like, remember that thing you tried to do that you couldn't? Here we are reminding you.
Haunted by the ghosts of auctions past.
Exactly.
Thank you for at least thinking of me.
I tried. I thought it would have been amazing.
Another benefit of the Emperor's script, understanding full well the indirect way in which he generated extra earnings for his favorite haunts. Norton was known to use his script to settle up his bills. To their credit, business owners would often accept it, particularly if the tourists were watching.
See, if I were Norton, that's when I would settle my bills, when the tourists were watching.
He definitely had the system figured out.
Good
by
for
then.
him.
Yeah,
Good for him.
Yeah. Now, dear guest, we reach the heart of it all. Grab a pen. If anyone ever asks you if you've ever heard about a lunatic named Emperor Norton, lay these facts on them. The San Francisco press may have never relented on making Emperor Norton look the fool, but one only had to observe His Majesty to recognize that, though his power was immaterial, his faculty for leadership was not. For a supposed crackpot, Emperor Norton was demonstrably saner than most of the political landscape. He was well-read, articulate, compassionate, innovative, and armed with vision and principles well beyond his time.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to hear some examples?
Yes, I would.
After starting each day by absorbing the latest in the local press, he would spend afternoons at a library, usually the Mechanics' Institute. He was their resident chess master, and he enjoyed chatting with the visiting inventors and leading technologists of the day. And it was here that he would write his many proclamations, and, unsurprisingly, his edicts would strongly support technological innovations that enhanced public welfare, like Frederick Marriott's early airship experiments. And he would announce visionary engineering concepts of his own, too. He eschewed the proposed placement of a bay-spanning bridge near what's now East Palo Alto, and decreed his preferred location, Oakland Point to Telegraph Hill, via what is now Yerba Buena Island, indeed predating the Bay Bridge by 64 years. But in his very next edict, he called for the research and construction of an underground railroad tunnel beneath the bay, predating the Transbay Tube of the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, aka the BART, by 102 years. Later, Norton sought to end train collisions when he himself designed an automatic, spring-based railroad switch activated by the weight of a passing train, the first switch of its kind.
Now, there was never a backer found for that, right, for that prototype?
Right, so it was all for naught, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, when the city's famous cable cars were first introduced in 1872, Jennifer, His Majesty was, surprisingly, not impressed. After inspecting the turn screw apparatus used to grip and release the running underground cable, Emperor Norton proclaimed it too weak for its function and a public safety hazard. Nobody responded, as per usual, but interestingly, the screw was fairly quickly replaced with a safer and much more efficient lever system.
Thank goodness, because hills, lots of hills in San Francisco. Let's not learn by experimentation.
Perhaps this was the heart of the San Franciscans' fondness for Emperor Norton. Despite his own circumstances, he never lost sight of their most basic everyday needs. If, on his regular rounds, the emperor found that streets, streetcars, ferries, and trains were not being properly maintained, or he felt taxes or the price of basic services were too high, he issued proclamations on these things too. Emperor Norton could be seen at public lectures, debates, and often attended the proceedings of the state legislature. These certainly contributed to the depth of knowledge from which his proclamations were drawn. And you know, read through contemporary eyes, his edicts on human rights were remarkably well ahead of their time. He proclaimed that all parties connected with frauds against Native Americans be tried in the presence of tribal authorities.
Awesome.
He demanded that African Americans be allowed to ride public streetcars and that they be admitted to public schools. He supported and signed a petition to grant women the right to vote, I think like 12 years before...
women's suffrage.
Yeah, and Wyoming was the first state. He commanded that the courts allow Chinese people to testify in court with fair representation.
That's so great.
The emperor didn't shy away from the topic of religion either. He was a religious humanist and pluralist who favored church-state separation. He warned against the dangers of Puritanism and sectarianism, particularly those who used the pulpit to take sides during the Civil War era. Norton refused to give his endorsement to any one church or synagogue, but rather he attended them all, Jennifer,
Wow.
in a demonstration of unity. 160 years have passed, dear listener, and still these stories take a distant backseat to the easy joke about the crazy guy with the beaver hat and ostrich plumes.
That hat is very compelling, but...
It's true. But still...
There's more to learn.
There's much more to learn. And in fact, there are many, many more stories about Norton I. But we'll close with these regarding his most loyal followers. Anecdotally, the phrase queen or king for a day originates with Emperor Norton. He issued this patent of nobility, especially to children, after they had done him a good deed, or when they were just having a bad day and needed some cheering up.
Aww.
Yeah, children simply adored him. During his 20-plus reign, His Majesty always found time amidst his royal duties to stop and earnestly speak to his littlest subjects. So famous was their rapport that school teachers would ask Norton to come to classrooms and lecture on the civility of good manners. And you know, the children would listen, for it was their friend, Emperor Norton, who would shepherd them into candy stores and command the people behind the counter to give them bonbons that no one would ever have to pay for, because all the shops had signs in their windows proclaiming that they were confectioners by appointment to His Imperial Majesty, Norton I.
Fantastic. Emperor Norton is one of Odd Tonic's patron saints because...
he was an unapologetic nonconformist, even in the face of ridicule.
Life went its way to kick him up and down the street and back, but even in his coldest, hungriest, most miserable hours, he never wavered from his truth.
He never failed to pursue and do the right thing, even when his philosophies went against popular thought.
And let's be honest, his fashion sense was distinctly his own.
Yes. He was also an inventor and an idealist, and with a strong will and a heart as big as the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, he took a wearisome existence and he created his own reality.
And now, dear guest, Odd Tonic has a proclamation of its own. Under the benevolent eye of the good emperor, we call to you.
You, the dreamers of the impossible and makers of the inscrutable.
You disciples of the esoteric and the aficionados of the absurd.
You, the anachronistic fashionitas and proud defectors of life's eternal dumpster fire.
Romantics, misfits, eccentrics, and true believers. Come with us.
Yes.
Become part of the Odd Tonic Society. We're building an online communal sanctuary for all of us, and together we'll discover, decipher, and design our own reality. More on this in weeks to come.
Stay tuned. We'd like to thank our sources, the book Norton I, Emperor of the United States by William Drury, GAzis-SAx's essay, The Madness of Joshua Norton, and emperorsbridge.org, which is an amazing resource of Emperor Norton material. Be sure to check out their Emperor Norton Map of the World and join their campaign to make Emperor Norton Bridge an honorary name for the Bay Bridge.
Yes.
Learn more at emperorsbridge.org.
That wraps up our first episode of Odd Tonic. Be sure not to miss our next episode as we recount true, spooky stories of the paranormal submitted from our Odd Tonic guests like you.
If you have a story to share or a topic you'd like to hear about in future episodes, please tell us at theparlor@oddtonicsociety.com.
And we're currently building a website. It will be the home of Odd Tonic Society, and we'll also have exclusive content that we'll call the Witching Hour, so please stay tuned for developments.
In the meantime, should you ever be at a fancy dinner party when an adjoining door bursts open, revealing a snarling wild animal carrying demented, costumed riders, don't worry.
It's just us.
Tally-ho!
Good night.